afternoon, everyone. We will wait 1 minute for all attendees to arrive and then we will start. I think we can slowly start. They're all welcome to our online debate on the role of national long-term strategies to reach climate neutrality in Europe. This event is organized under the Life Unify project and the Öykü project to build capacity to contribute the long-term planning in Visegrad 4+2 countries. So many of you know, I assume that under the governance regulation, member states are supposed to develop their national long-term strategies with a perspective of 30 years. And they were supposed to submit it to the European Commission by the 1st of January 2020. We know that some of them are still missing and others are a bit outdated. So in this event, we will hear from Mr. van Ierland about the Commission's assessment of the national long-term strategies, what is the role that they will play in Europe's transition to climate neutrality. And then we will also hear from Climate Action Network Europe Secretariat and its members about how the European civil society sees the role of national long-term strategies. So during the event, you can ask your questions from the Q&A box. At the end of the different interventions, we will hear from Mr. Tom van Ierland and also our civil society representatives. We will try to get your answers and share them and try to answer them as much as possible. So without taking much of your time, I would like to leave the floor to Mr. Tom van Ierland from the European Commission, the Directorate General of Climate Action, to present the Commission's assessment of national long-term strategies, how you see the role of those strategies in reaching climate neutrality objective of the EU and your recommendations for member states. So I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Yes?
Yes, okay, we hear you good. Perfectly.
Excellent. Yes, thanks, Goksen, for the meeting. And thanks for the opportunity to attend here. Now, I literally got a phone call 5 minutes ago from the school of my kids that 4 kids were with COVID infected in the class, and we need to pick up the kids as soon as possible because they have to go for 10 days into quarantine. So I'm going to do my presentation and then I'm going to leave so I can go to the school and pick up my kids. Sorry for this, but that was not planned. That's literally the state of affairs we are in. I think my colleague, maybe just to say, we should be 2 on the phone, and I'm just going to check Stefano Santacroce. Stefano, are you online? Not sure.
Yes, we see him in the attendee list. We will make him a panelist, and then he can maybe answer the questions.
Yeah, so he will. I hope he can attend until the last, and if there's anything that we still need to follow up, he can then react. So I apologize. Look, I wasn't planning to make a presentation. I also said that to the colleagues before today. Why? I think, I hope at least, that you have seen what we've done in the context of our progress report. So in the context of our progress report, which is an annual report where we basically provide information of the state of affairs around climate change, we did an assessment of the submitted long-term strategies. The assessment is incomplete. And of course, that starts because we only have 20 out of the 27 member states that have submitted a long-term strategy. And some of the member states that have not submitted are not small member states. Not that it matters in a way, but okay, if it would just be Malta that is not there, you could, of course, purely in a quantitative manner, one could do an assessment at the EU level, but we are not in that position now. We recognize that that is not, let's say, in line with the obligations of the legislation. And I can assure you that we continue to put this on the agenda. We have consulted all member states before we came out with this assessment in the context of the periodical meetings we do under the Climate Change Committee about the state of affairs of our assessment, and of course explicitly calling upon those who have not submitted to do so. Okay, as you see, that has not yet resulted in the full list there, but for us this is also work in progress. We do think that the policy agenda, including the one that came out of the government's regulation, is ambitious, and now I'm talking about ambitious purely in implementing it. And a number of authorities, let's say, do have, they are having their own issues with being able to deliver all the requirements. Of course, from the side of the Commission, we are aware of that, and to the extent possible, we try to foresee resources in the context that we can offer resources. And as you know, in the context of the NECPs and also ongoing work in the context of the RRF, there are a number of member states that are benefiting of let's say, consultancy services foreseen. But okay, the state of affairs remains that we have an incomplete picture. And for the picture that we have, I hope we have been quite transparent about how we see the national plans. So on our website, well, I was first planning to share my screen. I'm not sure, I'm not totally familiar with Zoom. Let's see, share screen.
Yes.
Host disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, don't worry. I think what I wanted to stress is if you haven't seen it yet, please have a look at our climate change progress report that came out 3 weeks ago, I think. It has a table, and that table goes, I would say, in quite some detail, to the extent that the table can summarize that, on how we see the national long-term strategies of those member states that submitted it. And next to that table, on the website of DG Clima, there is for each individual long-term strategy a 2-page summary of how we see the state of affairs of the long-term strategy. So I would say there is quite some information available on individual, you could say, assessment or summary of the different long-term strategies. The conclusion of that is that we cannot yet, conclude as we are required under the governance regulation to say, look, is this in aggregate sufficient to be in line with climate neutrality? I fear we're in a situation that you could see the glass half empty or half full. We find that a significant number of member states have quite some ambition in what they present as the goal for the long-term strategy. In total, 13 of them basically indicate climate neutrality by 2050 as the goal. And also a number of them basically have numbers between 80 and 95% listed or close to climate neutrality. And okay, I think in this setting I can say it, that member state that was referring to close to climate neutrality is Germany. And Germany has in the meantime actually increased its domestic ambition, and it wants to be climate neutral before 2050. The ones who are referring to a projection between 80 and 95%, most of them actually do not include land use change and forestry, which not everywhere in the EU, but by and large tends to be a sink, and of course a sink that we would like to see increasing by 2050. That combined says that at least for those member states that have expressed ambition, it is not that bad. It is not sufficient to conclude we are on track. I want to be clear, and I think we state that also like that. But certainly there is quite some ambition in most of them that presented the long-term strategy. I think, and that is something we also see back in your assessment, if it's then backed up with detailed policy prescription, or all the information as required in the initial, or at least requested, because be careful, the annex of the government regulation is indicative in the way that this is the type of information that one can supply. There indeed, I think we are also ourselves sometimes quite critical that not all information is provided. I think that's where we are at the moment with our assessment. We will have to revisit this when additional long-term strategies become available. I think what we also have indicated in our progress report is simply that we invite member states to, and if I use the language correctly, member states are therefore encouraged to consider to update and where possible to increase ambition of their national long-term strategies. I think update is here a general invite. Again, the legislation does not put us in the possibility to require it right now. There is a timing foreseen, and that timing is not in the near term. Nevertheless, as I think you all know, we are presently negotiating an increased ambition level for the 2030 climate and energy package. We have 13 legislative proposals on the table. What is very important in that context is that we do hope that most of this legislation can be renegotiated by, next year, latest 2023. And that matters because that is the cycle where we will have also the updates of the NECPs that need to be delivered by mid-2024. And of course, in that context, if member states find it appropriate, we could see further updates of the long-term strategies. So that's where I would like to keep it. I know that if you really would compare what we did as an assessment and what you did in the study that will be discussed further today, I don't think we are that far off assessing a purely, black and white, what is the type of ambition expressed as the goal. And I think what you, of course, are doing is you are more instructive on where you find improvements are needed. In that context, I would have loved to continue to listen to you and to have a flavor of the debate. Also to have a flavor, to be honest, how you see the debate evolve in the countries. I think the long-term strategies are not, a stick, I would say. They're not look, if not every single box is ticked off perfectly, bad boy, it should be immediately corrected. I think the long-term strategies should exactly become the kind of document where ambition can be shaped collectively, societal-wise, and where over time you can see, are you generally on track to get there? And that, I think, would be interesting to see if you find that in the different member states, the long-term strategy actually have triggered a debate on what this means for the country and what this means for the policies in the short term. I think, if anything, that is something that happened quite successfully at the EU level, and you can discuss from which direction that's coming, political, non-political, societal, stakeholders in general, but I think we generally have a very good debate now what climate neutrality means and what it will take in the coming years. And that is certainly something that I would be interested in if climate strategies serve that role also in member states, because I think that would be very useful. Again, I apologize. I'm going to take my bike and get a kid of school who will spend the next 10 days with me in this house. But that seems the new normal these days.
Thank you very much for the brief but concise presentation, and good luck with the working from home with kids. It's something that we all feel, the stress. And I think we now have, as the panelist, we have Stefano Santacroce, so we might ask him some questions after the different NGO interventions as the follow-up. And thank you very much again. So I will now give the floor to Harriet from Can Europe Secretariat to actually present a little bit the NGO findings about the NGO assessment on the national long-term strategies. And then we will go to the different countries to actually do a little bit deep dive on the point that Tom van Ireland raised, basically how these different national long-term strategies can guide the discussions at the national level for accelerating the transition to climate neutrality. So I would like to give the floor to Harriet right now, and if you can present us a little bit the main recommendations from the collective NGO assessment of the national long-term strategies.
Thanks, Goksen. Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion that arrives at a crunch time for ambition and how to get to where we want to go. So indeed, targets without a detailed plan or trajectory on how the member state will actually get there seem rather futile. I think after a COP where again increased ambition has been pushed back until the next years on a global stage, I think the EU must play a pioneering role and show the right example on how it can be done and entice others to follow suit. So thank you very much to Tom that has now, Mr. Van Eilen that has now left. So hopefully we'll be able to hear from his colleague just after if we have any questions. So as Goksen was just mentioning, Can Europe and its members published an analysis report on some of the national long-term strategies that were available. So the report is concentrated on Croatia, Czechia, Estonia, Hungary, Portugal, Poland, Slovenia, and Spain. And it discusses the current state of these plans and how they will help us to get, or how they will help member states to achieve the climate neutrality date of 2040, staying at 1.5 degrees. So I think what we could observe in these documents were very different levels of, for one, climate ambition, public participation, but also political ownership. So just to give you a brief picture, I think in terms of ambition, I think that's where you can see that some of the biggest, not only, but some of the biggest disparities. For example, in the Hungarian, Portuguese, Slovenian, Spanish long-term strategies, they all make clear references to the EU's 2050 climate neutrality objective and set the same objective for their own countries. Croatia acknowledges the EU climate neutrality objective, but does not commit and mentions it has to have a look at some scenarios at national level. Unfortunately, the Czech and the Estonian long-term strategies set an objective of 80% reductions by 2050. And Poland, which I will let our colleague Wojciech say more about, really protects its fossil fuel industry until 2040. Now, in terms of public participation, it was carried out mainly, but again, to very different levels. I think what we would need here is benchmarks so we should create some benchmarks to what meaning public participation actually means, and for that to be integrated. And I think this lack of public participation or lack of benchmarks for meaningful public participation can not only be seen here in national long-term strategies, which is the debate of today, but I think throughout the entire Fit for 55 package, which Mr. Van Eilen also mentioned in link to this file, because of all the 13 directives that are currently regulations that are currently under review. So to come back to national long-term strategies, so if these were done, taking into account scientific evidence and EU policy developments, they could become a very useful tool. They could become the guiding documents for member states' transition to a climate neutral economy. They would be able to serve as a monitoring tool for the European Commission to follow up on the EU's longer term ambition gap and direct funds to close that very gap. So as Goksen was also mentioning, this report also brings some recommendations to the European Commission, but also to member states. So as far as the European Commission goes, it would be very good to see if they could provide some very clear guidance by making a collective ambition gap assessment, but also request all member states, and I stress the all, missing long-term strategies to be submitted as soon as possible. So with this in mind, we definitely warmly welcome the progress report from the Commission, but look forward to see the full analysis as soon as this will be available. Of course, we understand that can only be done when some of the big member states have submitted their strategies. So given that member states will need to update their 2030 NECPs, so National Energy and Climate Plans, in order to implement the new target that has been set, this opportunity should also be used, we feel, to revise, update and finalize long-term strategies. In order to monitor the consistency of targets, policies and measures, NECPs and national long-term strategies, an integrated comprehensive monitoring system should be launched. This would greatly help measures progress and towards reaching climate neutrality and would provide consistency between short and long-term plans. Now, with this in mind, we also feel that the Commission should update the NECP and national long-term strategy templates contained in the governance regulation. So I think we all know that the revision of the governance regulation did not quite make it to the Commission's 22 work programme. But the templates for these that go back to 2018, we feel no longer reflect the latest science and developments in the EU climate and energy policies, and therefore need to be amended and shared with member states well in advance, allowing them to adapt to an updated template. Maybe this would also be a good opportunity to ask all member states to submit a climate neutrality date integrated into their national long-term strategy. Then there was also a set of recommendations destined to member states, where they should be asked and called upon to see the long-term strategies as not as a tool, as a tool and not as a box-checking exercise. And I think this is exactly what Mr. van Eiland also just mentioned. This would be a huge mistake to consider them as only this and not a very useful element in their planning. It could bring all aspects together. So here we're talking about, as it encompasses targets, policies, measures, and investment plans of various sectors, climate, energy, and economic plans. So I think our recommendations kind of were reflected in what Tom van Eiland said, and I think I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harriet. I think kind of how the Fit for 55 might amend the governance regulation and how we can update the NLTS and NECP templates is an important question that we would need to discuss at the end of this call a little bit. And I also see that the questions start coming. So maybe we leave to leave a little bit more time for the discussion at the end. Now I will quickly give the floor to Teodóra from Hungary to actually, well, this is, the Hungarian NLTS example is a good example where we see that it opened a debate and it's a bit more ambitious than the Hungarian NECP, but still it needs to be revised with concrete policies and measures to actually get Hungary to climate neutrality as early as possible. So how do you see this exercise created a dynamic in the country for accelerating the transition?
Thank you, Goksen, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, definitely. The Hungarian national long-term strategy has made a big step forward in terms of climate ambition compared to the National Energy and Climate Plan. And this was possible because there were more than 1.5 years between the adoption of the two documents. And in between, during those 1.5 years, the Parliament also passed an act in which it declared that Hungary would target climate neutrality by 2050. And the NLTS already adopts this target, where the NLTS is also more progressive than the NECP is that it presents 2 or actually 3 scenarios. That is the business as usual, and a late action and an early action scenario for climate action, and gives a summary of the investment needs, avoided costs, savings, revenue potentials, job potential of each of these scenarios. And one more point where the NLTS is more progressive than the NECP is that both in terms of energy efficiency targets and in terms of renewables targets, it goes beyond the figures that are there in the NECP. However, we have to note that that the scenarios presented practically only diverge beyond 2030. Much of the task on climate action is to be done beyond 2030. And well, even if it looks nice so far, there are still problems that Goksen also mentioned, and gaps that would need to be filled in the coming months and years in order to make the NLTS a really functional document. So what are the problems? The key problem is that the strategy presents these scenarios, the early action and the late action scenario, pretty well, but it does not cast its clear vote for the early action scenario. It has relatively weak language, which keeps the NLTS at the level of practically a wish list, not much more. It does not provide specific or propose specific measures with quantified timelines, interim targets, the scale of necessary measures or so that would lead to achieving climate neutrality by 2050. This is especially relevant in the case of the improvement of energy performance of buildings and the necessary investments that would lead there. There is no clear timeline or the scale of investments or support needed on an annual basis or a 5-annual basis or so. But this is just an example of one of the sectors where specificities are missing. The NLTS does not aim to phase out fossil fuels by 2050. It only aims to phase out coal by that date, but it definitely looks at gas as a transition fuel. And while we also see that Hungary also signed an agreement with Russia for the next 10 or 15 years on gas supply. This is one example where the NLTS gets into self-contradiction on the issue of energy sovereignty, and another point where this self-contradiction is relevant is the issue of nuclear energy, because the NLTS relies heavily on nuclear. It takes this practically as a baseline, and even if it mentions decentralization of energy supply and consumption, it even mentions prosumerism, but the whole energy mix and the measures proposed do not really support the real implementation of decentralization of energy mix. Along with this, the role of renewable energy sources is also relatively weak in the strategy. What I mean here is that the full potential of renewable sources is not exploited. The strategy does not address the problem of a de facto ban on wind energy, and the reduction of energy need and energy efficiency are not high enough on the agenda of the NLTS. While the problems I outlined here show that there is still way to go and steps to be done to make this a really functional and guiding document for future policy decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dori. As you said, this is, NLTS are just debate starters, but we have a long way to go to make them real strategic plans to plan nationally the transition to low carbon economies. I will now give the floor to Ana, because in Spain, what is interesting is that the modeling used for NECP and the National Long-Term Strategy is the same one. And actually you can see how the transition between 2030 and then 2040 and 2050, basically, and it gives you a kind of a coherent pathway, even though it's not 1.5 compatible, it is still a pathway that is showing the transition and the consistencies between long-term and the short-term. So I would like to give you the floor right now to explain a little bit how the national long-term strategy in Spain created a debate around the long-term vision of the country. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to ISD Foundation and Can Europe for inviting Birdlife to this webinar on the role of national long-term strategies to reach climate neutrality in Europe. And thanks to Goksen for introducing us to the topic, and to Tom and Harriet for these two interesting presentations on long-term strategies assessment from both the European Commission and NGOs' perspectives. After hearing about the Hungarian LTS, I will give in these few minutes some inputs about the Spanish one. Despite some delay, Spain submitted in November 2020 to the European Commission its long-term strategy by 2050 for a modern, competitive and climate neutral economy. And it is a comprehensive document built from scratch, although with a quick and insufficient participatory process, but that serves to give continuity, as Goksen mentioned, until the 2050 horizon to the policies and measures included in the Spanish National Energy and Climate Plan. In terms of climate ambition, the strategy makes a clear reference to the EU climate neutrality target, as Harriet has already mentioned, and it establishes to reach this same target no later than 2050 by reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 90% compared to 1990 and removing the remaining 10% through carbon sinks. Since this will require a profound transformation of all sectors of the economy, the document shows the pathways towards decarbonization in all sectors and therefore serves as a guide to orientate investments in the coming years towards a new emission-free economy model. In addition, the document identifies new economic and job creation and R&D opportunities brought by the decarbonization process. And also the strategy addresses the other great dimension in the fight against climate change, adaptation, as well as the role of natural capital as a valuable carbon sink. But of course, there is always room for improvement. And although the current difficulties over the electricity price still need to carefully attention, we believe that Spain now has a strong foundation for more rapid progress in its energy transition and economy transformation. Indeed, Spain has many options to bring forward its 2030 and 2050 targets. And the post-COVID recovery, supported by the massive Next Generation EU and translated into the Spanish Recovery and Resilience Plan, is a unique opportunity to consolidate and accelerate these emissions reductions. Indeed, the Spanish Recovery and Resilience Plan recognizes that some NECP measures and policies initially planned for 2025 could be already implemented in 2023. So as Tom mentioned, we are waiting for the NECP revision in 2023, and this should greatly increase ambition on emission reduction, renewable energy, and energy saving. And given that the Spanish LTS is very, very much in line with this roadmap toward 2030, there is a necessity to ensure that both strategic documents stay well aligned with the principle of efficiency first and leaving behind fossil fuels, but not vulnerable people, groups, or territories, Spain already has many of the regulatory and financial instruments needed to get on track to reach climate neutrality before mid-century. And I stop here.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think that's a very important point to see the consistencies between the recovery and resilience plans, the national energy and climate plans, and the national long-term strategies. This is, well, they should all serve for the same purpose at the end of the day. Thank you very much. And now I will give the floor to Wojciech, where, I mean, we don't have a national long-term strategy in Poland, but we have a 2040 energy vision, which is unfortunately heavily relying on fossil fuels. So if you can share us some updates about the national long-term strategy preparation process in Poland, and especially the public participation and how the civil society can have a voice in there, that will be, I think, very useful for other participants to understand a little bit why some countries are a bit behind the process. Wojciech, on this note, I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you. Yes, there is nothing to talk about in Poland because we don't have the strategy. So there is nothing to talk about. But no, it's not true. In fact, the strategy is in preparation for a very long time. As I have been updating myself about this process before COP26, they told me that it's going to be only a few weeks longer, but I expected that maybe it will, I mean, the consultation may start during COP just to have some sort of a success on the COP, but it didn't happen. So right now, again, it's, don't know when date of the opening of the possible consultation of the national long-term strategy in Poland, and that's somehow a pity. I hope that it's going to happen sooner than later, but I don't know what is sooner, and I don't know what is later as well. And as we don't have this long-term strategy, we have, of course, a national climate plan. And this plan is should be treated together with the Polish energy policy. This is not a Polish energy vision, but this is a policy. So this is a formal document that is strictly have been accepted by the government. And together with the national climate, energy and climate plan to 2030, and the policy is up to 2040. And yes, in fact, this policy is very narrow in its politics towards climate because it in fact relies still on the coal industry and coal energy production for until the end of 2040 and further, because at the end of this document we still should have above 20-25% of coal, or at least fossil fuels in production of energy, and our energy would still emit more than 200 kilograms of CO2 by megawatt hour, so it's quite a lot. And of course, this document is only relating to the energy sector. This is not comprehensive enough to cover all other sectors which emit a lot of fossil fuels. Especially transport has started to emit a lot. For last 5 years, there have been this very big increase of the emission, and we've got a lot of emissions from farming and industry as well. So this is not solely energy that we have, and of course we've got quite a big country as for Europe. So a lot of attention should be drawn also to the LULUCF sector and the reduction of emission, or the emission from the land use change. And this is not covered by this policy. This is partly covered by National Energy and Climate Plan, but especially for the biodiversity and land use. It looks like it's beyond of the control of the government, and there are virtually no policy now for this. And the other sectors have their separate sectoral policies, and this is not coming to one vision of the country that is trying to decarbonize quite fastly up to 2050 or even earlier. But this vision is not known. The only hope now for me is that, as I said, maybe the consultation and the opening of the LTS consultation will start quite soon. And the second hope is that Poland has started a consultation for the document that is, the status is not known, but it is called a concept for the development of the country. And this consultation have been quite broad in October and September. And there have been also a consultation meeting about the sustainability, and a lot of NGOs has placed their opinion then on this meeting also about the climate. So maybe there are some issues on climate will be introduced, and this concept is proposed up to 2050. So maybe here something will be made comprehensive together with the climate issue, but we don't know. This is right now there's quite a big, let's say, blank spot in the ministries, and you have to dig quite and even if you find somebody who will tell you how it is going to be from one ministry, the other ministry can say something else. So that is more or less the situation right now in Poland. Thank you. I think we need to go to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wojciech. I think we have been lined up with quite a number of questions with the interventions, and also I will start reading the questions from the Q&A box, and I think we will direct them to Mr. Santa Croce after we first go through those questions. So in the chat box, I see a question from Roman from WWF EU office. It seems that the Commission has tried to assess whether aggregated NLTS take us to the climate neutrality by 2050, but this cannot be done because member states are not all of them are aligned, and or they haven't provided enough information, or they have not submitted the strategy. So shouldn't this be corrected now that we have a binding EU targets through the climate law? And can this be done by amending the governance regulation? And while we were having the interventions, we also had questions about how the governance regulation can be amended to have actually some NECP and national long-term strategy templates that are aligned with the current science and the needs that we will have after the Fit for 55 package has become operational. So we have this questions, and then now we have another question from David Howell from SEO Birdlife Spain. The Glasgow Climate Pact agreed a few days ago in COP26 request parties to the Paris Agreement to submit by the end of 2022 revised NDCs aligned with the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement. So what is the role of the new European Scientific Advisory Board on Climate Change in advising the Commission on the possible needs, the Commission, the Parliament and the Council on the possible need to increase the existing net 55% emission reduction objective? And yeah, so maybe on these notes, we can leave the floor to you and then Mr. Santa Croce, and then we can continue with additional questions.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's unfortunate that Tom could not continue this. He's surely more well suited than me to respond to this question, but I'll try to do my best. Indeed, I found the Can Europe report quite timely, and the point raised before by Harriet found also very useful. In particular, the points on the governance. What we should realize is that the deadline, including this governance, arrived in a time where there was like an earthquake on climate change and climate actions. So the deadline of January 2020 for the presentation of LTS, I think, reached the country in the same time where we were deciding to upgrade our efforts and to revise also our targets. So I think that part of this alignment is due to the situation, which is good in the sense that go in the direction of increase our commitments, but in terms of governance has created a little bit of trauma, if you want. And I think that we need to stabilize a little bit. Probably 2020, 2021 has been years where we decide to revise the targets. Now it's time to work toward those targets in terms of policy implementation and monitoring. And I think that the NECDC and the LTS, so the long and the medium strategy, we work together in a better way. That's why in our recommendation, the final sentence that Tom read just before, we encourage member states to come with an update of the LTS. It was also a bit difficult for the Commission to push member states to present the long-term strategy at the same time where we were revising our targets. So I think there was also psychologically, the Commission didn't know where to wait a little bit for the LTS to be updated with the new targets or force member states to present as soon as possible. So this, I think, I was not there, but I think has created a little bit of misunderstanding. But our analysis is very, very similar to the one in the report. So we found a lot of heterogeneity in the level of completeness, in the level of ambition, in the level of reference to particular indicators. And this, of course, make our life a little bit more complex in terms of assessing the collective achievement of targets. So to reply to the question, I don't remember who said that, sure, I mean, ideally, both the NACD and the long-term strategy should be based on the same template in terms of indicators. I don't know at what stages the revision of the governance regulation. It's not done in my unit. So to be more explicit, I'm in the modeling unit, so dealing with the economic macro modeling of the unit, and there's another unit which deal with the governance regulation. But this is of course, is a way, but there's another way is that a commission can speak with member states, found an agreement on a common set of indicators, and try to improve the quality of what has been submitted. What I'd say at the very end is that long-term strategies are very useful to set a long-term target, to make it stable, so to give a good signal to the market, to the people, to the society, that this is where we want to go. And it's also useful to increase ownership. I think that these two elements, so reliable and stable targets and ownership, are the two ingredients of the long-term strategies. Then the facts, if you put the right indicators or homogeneity across country, it's important, but maybe it's not the main target, the main value of the long-term strategies. Of course, this should be allowed to make an assessment at the end. I don't know if I replied to the question.
Yeah, thank you. The event is also live broadcasted on Facebook, and we have one question from Facebook that asks actually how the CBAM would play a role, and how does it relate to the Fit for 55 and the implementation of actually national policies. So I don't know if you would like to comment on that.
CBAM is an element of the Fit for 55. Let's see how the discussion will go with the Council and the Parliament. Of course, it's part of the package.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much for your answer. So we have, I think, a couple of minutes, and I see that Wojciech has a question, and maybe it's a direct question, so I will let him ask his question.
Oh, sorry, I was just giving you a sign that it's 5 minutes left.
Okay, great. So we are only 5 minutes left, and then I will use that 5 minutes for the kind of good reason to ask one more question. It is about actually, again, the Commission's plans. We know that it's, I mean, the governance regulation says that in 5 years' time, they should be revised, the national long-term strategies. So, and then we discussed a little bit how they can be revised in parallel to NECPs or right after NECPs. And I mean, in the meantime, there will also be, as very much related to David's question about the new NDCs, we will also have under the EU climate law a new 2040 climate target that will be proposed by the Commission in and around 2020, I mean, in 2024, basically. So how do you see this 2040 targets entering in the debate in relation to long-term strategies and actually shaping the revision of long-term strategies? So we see a potential of actually overshooting the current targets, like the 2020 targets are overshoot. We are now increasing 2030 targets, and then we might maybe have an ambitious 2040 targets. And then how do you see that relating to the long-term plans?
Difficult question. Yeah, I think it's okay. It's part of the strategy. Is in the climate law. I think that we need to progress gradually. We could not, run too fast. We need to bring all the society, all countries with us. Otherwise, we will not work. And we just start to analyze a little bit what would be. Of course, most of this is based on our models, and then we need to see whether this will be, how this will impact for each member state. I think provide targets along the pathway is always useful. It gives you more anchor to set your own national strategies instead of having no anchor. So I think this it's an opportunity more than a constraint. That's what I see.
Thank you very much. I don't know if other participants has other questions, but we came to the end of this session. And thank you very much for the participating and accepting to actually answer our questions that were initially directed to Mr. Van Ireland, and then we a little bit put you on the spot in an unexpected way. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to all other colleagues from Hungary, Spain, and Poland to be with us today. Thank you, and have a nice day.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.